Hello everyone, long time no talk. Today we'll be discussing a topic that Ben's been covering for some time now.
Trans people, transgenderism, trans people, transgender people, propaganda about transgenderism, transgender identity, transgender individuals, people identifying as transgender, transgenderism.
But despite how long Ben's been talking about transgenderism, there's a lot he hasn't been telling you. If you want to understand an issue, you need the full picture, so we'll be looking at what he's left out. Now, going into this video, I realize that transgenderism is still a contentious subject. For many Americans, transgenderism is still a new and confusing concept they're skeptical of. And that's okay. It's good to question what people tell you. It's good to want to know where they got their info from. Which is why I'll be providing sources to back up everything I say, all of which are available down below so you can look into them for yourself. But without further ado, on to the video. So how about we start with one of Ben's most popular videos on this topic, Ben Shapiro destroys transgenderism in pro-abortion arguments.
So, how do you say that some people don't have privilege when you basically just said that trans people aren't valid? They're not a thing. They're just girls pretending to be boys or boys pretending to be girls.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, someone's excited, okay.
Biological, but gender is a completely different thing.
No, gender is not disconnected from sex, so.
It's not completely disconnected, but it's still a cultural thing. It's still from society. It's
Okay, no, it is not in the mind, okay? You're not a man if you think you're a man. I am saying that you are not the sex to which you claim to be.
Now, here's something Ben does frequently when debating transgenderism. He'll conflate the word sex with gender.
Pretending that sex is completely malleable is evil. Just because you declare you are a member of the opposite sex does not make you a member of the opposite sex. If by anti the trans community you mean I am not going to suggest that you are a member of the sex to which you claim membership, then okay. I'm not going to suggest that you're a member of the biological sex to which you do not belong. It's illogical and it's foolish. The idea that we as an entire society have to redefine what sex is and we have to blind ourselves to what biology is, this is something I'm not willing to do.
While these two words may be interchangeable in everyday conversation, in science they have distinct meanings. Just like how we're not using the common definition of theory when talking about atomic theory, cell theory, or the theory of evolution, we're not using the common definition of gender when talking about transgenderism. So, sex refers to the biological differences between males and females, things like your chromosomes, hormones, anatomy, etc. On the other hand, gender refers to two different things. The first being gender identity, which is your internal sense of who you are. The second being gender expression, which is how you express your gender identity, through things like makeup, clothing, personality, etc. And no, these definitions are not from Tumblr or CNN. They are from the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the NIH, the American Academy of Pediatrics, basically every organization that would specialize in this subject. Unlike, for example, a lawyer. Of course, Ben's lack of background in this subject doesn't mean he can't talk about it, but if you're going to debate something, you should know ahead of time which definitions are being used. Otherwise, you'll be talking past each other and confusing everyone listening.
I'm not going to modify basic biology because it threatens your subjective sense of what you are.
Ben, accepting transgenderism isn't modifying biology, it's acknowledging biology. Before Ben had this debate, the Boston University School of Medicine and the Endocrine Society both conducted literature reviews of transgender research. They looked at studies on genetics, brain structure, hormone exposure before birth, etc. What did their reviews find? There is compelling evidence for a biological basis of gender identity. And a third literature review published after Ben's debate also found the same thing. But even if transgenderism was modifying biology, well, that's part of how science works. As we keep doing research, we may find out that our past conclusions were incorrect and need to be changed. That's called the scientific method, a thing you supposedly admire.
The development of the scientific method. These are accomplishments of a scope and scale that only the West can claim. The idea behind the transgender movement as a civil rights movement is the idea that all of their problems would just go away if I would pretend that they were the sex to which they claim membership. That's nonsense. The transgender suicide rate is 40%. It is 40%. And according to the Anderson School at UCLA, it makes no difference. There's a study that came out last year. It makes no difference virtually no difference, statistically speaking, as to whether people recognize you as a transgender person or not.
Now, unfortunately, Ben doesn't provide a link to this paper below any of his uploads of this video, but I tracked it down, so how about we look at it? 2 corrections before going forward. The study actually came from the Williams Institute, not the Anderson School as Ben claimed, and the paper wasn't about the trans suicide rate, but the suicide attempt rate. But yes, the paper did find that the attempt rate among trans people is about 40%. However, what about Ben's second claim?
It makes no difference, virtually no difference, statistically speaking, as to whether people recognize you as a transgender person or not.
Well, if you read beyond the first paragraph, it also found that respondents who experienced rejection by family and friends, discrimination, victimization, or violence were more likely to attempt suicide. So the paper says the exact opposite of what Ben claimed. It's hard to imagine how Ben could have missed that part when it's mentioned on the summary page twice.
I think I'm able to read a sociological study.
Furthermore, a literature review in the journal European Psychiatry found that risk factors for suicide in the trans community included things like lack of family and social support, gender-based discrimination, and transgender-based abuse. A separate literature review by Cornell University looked at over 2 decades worth of research and found that trans people who encounter unsupportive social environments are more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and suicidality. And there's multiple other papers that have continued to find the same thing. The research goes on and on and on.
Do you think it could be because of they're bullied at school?
No, I don't think that, I do not think that the discrepancy, first of all, I'm against bullying of any sort, okay? The idea that somebody would beat somebody up is terrible, okay? As somebody who's viciously bullied in high school, I'm not a fan of bullying. But the idea that the normal suicide rate across the United States is 4%, the suicide rate in the transgender community is 40%. The idea that 36% more transgender people are committing suicide because people are mean to them is ridiculous. It's not true, and it's not backed by any science that anyone can cite.
Except for the science that Ben cited under a minute ago. The paper says multiple times that bullying contributes to trans suicidality. Additionally, an international study from 2016, before Ben's debate happened, found that bullying is a major risk factor that influences suicidal behavior among trans people. And the American Psychological Association has also found that gender-diverse children who are victimized in school are at increased risk for mental health problems, including attempting suicide. To pretend that bullying doesn't play a role here is
ridiculous.
Especially since research has shown that LGBT teens are nearly 5 times more likely to be bullied before suicide. Since Ben claims to have been viciously bullied in high school, you'd think he'd show a little more interest in addressing this problem.
Plus, there's no evidence whatsoever that the suicide rate would go down in the transgender community in any marked way if people just started pretending that men were women and women were men. We're trying that experiment now. We'll find out whether it works. So far, no evidence.
Well, I think you know what's coming. According to the evidence that Ben himself referenced earlier, lifetime suicide attempts were lowest among those who said people can never tell they're trans, and highest among those who said people can usually or always tell. Oh, and by the way, when the researchers updated this report in 2019, they found that access to gender-affirming medical care is associated with a lower prevalence of suicide thoughts and attempts. This was also the conclusion of the literature review by Cornell. Now, imagine how difficult it would be to correct Ben on all this during an on-the-spot debate. Because this video is prepared content, I had time to look into everything he said. But if you're debating him in person, you're not going to be given time to go on your phone and verify what he tells you. He can misrepresent any research that most people aren't familiar with, and as long as he sounds confident, the audience will take his word for it.
He makes a lot of sense. You can't argue with Ben Shapiro, really. He throws so many facts out there. It's like, ugh.
Facts.
Check them.
This is one of the most popular videos on both the Ben Shapiro and Daily Wire channel, which combined have over 11 million views. And that's not even counting the additional 48 million views from the Facebook upload. To call this video influential would be an understatement. And yet, over the 4 years this video's been available, Ben has never bothered to correct the record. Rather, he's continued to re-upload the video as recently as 2020, never adding additional info correcting what he got wrong. Pretty odd behavior for a guy who says facts don't care about your feelings. And Ben's comprehension of transgenderism does not appear to have improved over time. When the actor Elliot Page, formerly known as Ellen Page, came out as a trans man, Ben was quick to complain about it in an over 9-minute long video.
We have now been forced as a society to simply say nonsense. To simply just say things that are nonsense, that don't make any sort of logical sense. You end up with complete nonsense. Just complete bleh coming out of the mouths of the media. And don't feel bullied. Don't feel as though you are being forced to change long-standing and, for all of human history, held opinions.
And yet again, years later, he's still conflating sex with gender.
When you're declaring something as core as your sex, there is no objective measure whatsoever whereby Ellen Page is a man. None. She does not get to dictate what the rest of us say about things as basic as biological sex and capital T truth.
Rest assured, though, Ben totally doesn't care about this story.
Now listen, Ellen Page can identify however she wants. I don't care. Really, it makes no difference to me. She is an adult human. She can do whatever she wants. It is a free country.
Because when you don't care about something, ranting about it on your show for over 9 minutes straight, turning that rant into a separate video for your channel, and titling your video about the very topic you claim not to care about is definitely what you do. However, what I find most interesting about this video is not the story on Elliot Page. Rather, it's the tangent Ben later goes on attacking trans bathrooms.
Yesterday, Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, he said that he is fully with Joe Biden on mandating from the federal government that transgender people be allowed to use the bathroom of their choice. Now, it seems to me that if my wife is uncomfortable with a male walking into a bathroom or a locker room where she is undressing at the gym, that is perfectly within her purview. That seems like not inappropriate at all to me.
Well, Ben, to quote you,
I don't care about your feelings. Your feelings are unimportant.
We would never accept this discomfort argument in any other context. If a white person felt uncomfortable sharing the bathroom with black people, or if a Muslim felt uncomfortable sharing the bathroom with Jewish people, we would tell them that while they're free to feel however they want, their discomfort does not justify discrimination. Another argument Ben makes against trans bathrooms is that it allegedly puts women in danger, a claim which he never gives citations for. Well, here's mine. According to a 2018 study, the passage of non-discrimination laws for public restrooms, locker rooms, and changing rooms is not related to the number or frequency of criminal incidents in those spaces. As it turns out, the kinds of people willing to commit a crime like sexual assault really don't care whether or not they're allowed into a bathroom. A bathroom sign is about as effective at stopping a predator as a gun-free zone sign is for stopping a shooter. Furthermore, the study found that reports of privacy and safety violations in these areas to begin with are not only rare, but exceedingly rare, and that the fears espoused by people like Ben are not empirically grounded.
Facts don't care about your feelings.
For a guy who would typically scoff at the idea of rape culture, Ben certainly is happy to engage in the same kind of rhetoric when it comes to trans people. If this were a debate about rape on college campuses, Ben would argue that the level of fear isn't backed up by the data.
I think that we should make very clear that rape needs to be stopped, but the idea that everybody out there is on the verge of raping women, which is sort of what rape culture suggests, is just not true, and it's a slander against men.
And yet, when it comes to the bathroom debate, the data no longer seems to matter. While the rate of victimization in public restrooms may be low, as we covered earlier, the suicide attempt rate among trans people is not. And as we also covered earlier, part of the reason for such a high rate is due to discrimination. So laws preventing that discrimination are one step we can take in getting that rate lower. But I guess for pro-life Ben, a few graves are a small price to pay if it means keeping his wife comfortable. You might want to ask yourself why a man whose catchphrase is "facts don't care about your feelings" keeps getting the facts wrong. Why does Ben repeatedly conflate definitions when the scientific definitions are widely available to him? Why will Ben reference a research paper when part of it supports his position, but then ignore parts of the same paper that contradict him? Why will Ben dismiss feelings when they come from the left, but then go on to use feelings himself? Well, I think the answer may be found in Ben's bluntly titled book, How to Debate Leftists and Destroy Them, where, on the very first page he wrote, "All that matters is victory." That's a message that seems to have been lost among conservatives, who are constantly focused on the virtue of their message, the intellectual honesty of their cause, and the frustration of having nobody care about either. Well, that's quite a different attitude from Ben, lecturing people for focusing on intellectual honesty, telling them to only care about victory. There's a noticeable flip in Ben's rhetoric depending on who he's speaking to. When being interviewed, Ben will claim the purpose of debate is sharing ideas.
One of the reasons that you have these debates is the same reason that Socrates had debates with random people on the street. I mean, the purpose is to elucidate ideas and bring ideas to the forefront.
But when in front of a conservative crowd,
And the goal of this debate is not to convince the leftists, because leftists are not easily convinced because they operate from the cockles of their small hearts and even tinier brains. So the goal here is not to actually convince the leftist, it's to humiliate them as badly as possible in front of as large a number of people as possible. I'm not a fan of bullying. So the only other reason that you should ever have a conversation or be friends with anyone on the left is, and not even be friends, is if you are in public in front of a large audience, and then your goal is to humiliate them as badly as possible.
when in front of a politically diverse audience like at Politicon, Ben will proclaim the virtue of not assuming nasty intent.
You know, I tend to try and avoid, if I can, attributing nasty intent to people with whom I disagree, because I think everybody's trying to do their best, or at least most people are trying to do their best, and they just come up short.
Yet, when the audience is exclusively conservative,
the truth is that if they told you what they really believed, everyone hates that, right? What the left actually believes deep down is so reprehensible and so repugnant and so gross that they will never say it out loud.
When you put all the pieces together, it couldn't be more fitting that Ben's initials are BS.
When you have an agenda, it allows you to run roughshod. It really does allow you to run roughshod over your own supposed central principles. You can tell where people's real principles lie by which principles people are willing to violate in pursuit of those primary principles.
With all of that being said though, thank you for watching. Producing this video was made possible thanks to my generous supporters on Patreon. If you too would like to help support my content, a link to my Patreon can be found down below. You can also give this video a thumbs up to help boost it in the YouTube algorithm. And please make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos come out. Have a great day.